We all get to read and hear about the pace and shape of this transition through print, electronic, and digital media that we consume. The scribes at these media houses have a unique vantage point to interact with all possible stakeholders from a perspective that is easy for us to digest and consume. May I now invite on stage Mr. Hormazd Sorabjee, Editor, Autocar, India, Ms. Renuka Kirpalani, Executive Editor, Video Content, Autocar, India, Ms. Harsha Kumari Singh, Editor, News and Special Projects, NDTV, and Mr. Samrat Phadnis, Editor, Sakal. Thank you, panelists, for joining us here today. Mr. Sorabjee, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to MCCIA and all stakeholders for inviting us to this conclave. Very fitting it is in Pune because ever since I've been covering the auto industry, which is for over 30 years, this region more and more is becoming the center of gravity for the automotive industry. Going up and down now on the expressway, which we take so much for granted, really has made the commute between Mumbai and Pune like just going from a suburb of one city to the other. And clearly, I think, we can see how the auto industry has grown. I mean, Chakan, an area which we go to regularly, really the hub of all activity. So I think very fitting that we are having this conclave here. Now, moving on to the subject, which is just talking generally about electrification, electric mobility. I think what has startled me personally is that the pace of electrification has taken off much faster than many expected. Quite frankly, it's got also a lot of traditional OEMs flat-footed in this. Everyone's now scrabbling to get electrified solutions into the market. But it is amazing, and I think that's really very exciting as well, that India as a country, this industry is sort of embraced electrification to an order that has actually surprised even the global industry. And it is for this reason. You even have a company like Ford, which exited India, but has done a U-turn and talked about coming back into India with electric products. So that really is a testimony to, how exciting this market is for electric vehicles. I think also what's pushing electrification is a lot of things. Obviously the ecosystem is growing. There's a lot of awareness now being created. A lot of green number plates which we are seeing on the road, and there's a famous saying that, jo dikhta hai, wo bikta hai, and clearly that is in itself self-perpetuating. And I think we can't rule out, I think, what is the biggest trigger right now, which is the rocketing fuel prices, which there is a direct correlation between this and electrification. So I think, just to set a bit of context, just wanted to give some opening remarks and then pass it on to my colleagues over here who would, speak on their views. But I think, as far as electrification goes, I think we are on a journey. We've seen in the two-wheeler space, how it has proliferated, really rapidly growing. Obviously, a lot of, let's say, opportunity on the commercial vehicle side. That, of course, is driven by total cost of ownership, because quite honestly, commercial operators, let's be honest, would be more, let's say, inclined to saving their pockets than planet Earth. That's just how it is. But I think, again, it shows there is a compelling case, even from a total cost of ownership point of view, of electrification. So across the board, across industries, it's really, exciting, and it's there. Speaking on the passenger vehicle side, which I'm closely associated with, we've driven every electric vehicle that's on sale in India. We keep running them right now. I think a couple of things which come to mind is that this whole issue of range anxiety. As an owner, is range anxiety real? I would be honest and say yes and no. Yes, if you plan to take the vehicle out of town, because clearly, there are still the charging infrastructure is growing. Just to give you an example, I went to Mahabaleshwar 2 years back and almost got stuck because there was nothing around over there, but just now there are already charging points along the way, so it's really improving over there. I think the other driver really is cost, which it needs to come down a lot. And I think the what people don't realize also right now is that there is a fundamental lack of choice, especially in the passenger car space. There's really no real affordable EVs right now. I mean, we've seen how important affordability is. A company like Tata with the Nexon has just taken the market by storm, over 80% market share. This is just amazing. And purely because they've managed the right balance of price, performance, range, that sort of thing. But I think a lot of myths are also there. If you're running an EV in the city, and you have access to a plug point, it is even more convenient than an IC car because you have your petrol pump at home. You literally charge it in the night, you never have to visit a petrol pump. So I think also there's the way EVs drive, all that sort of thing. So I think, overall, electrification is something that I think we are seeing consumers are embracing more and more. And you see more and more green number plates on the road. That's now like a badge of honor, your eco credentials. Some people, like to have a flashy luxury badge, but I think this is now the new kind of, let's say, status symbol in many ways for a lot of people. And, with this, I think, we have a pretty exciting road ahead. And with that, I just like to, toss it to Renuka, who's editor of the Autocar show. And Renuka's driven, I think, also every EV. And Renuka, just from a driving perspective, living with an EV, how convenient is it? Is it something that, is charging an issue? How does it perform? That sort of thing.
I think living with an EV is actually quite easy. I had huge range anxiety myself when I first got an EV to test drive, and I was supposed to have it for the week. I ran around getting the charger fitted, changing all the electric points in my garage and all, and then at the end of the week realized I didn't use it even once. Because on your daily commute to office and back, and just the small range that you do within a city, honestly you would need to charge a EV maybe once in a week, especially if you have a small run. So they're actually quite practical when you run them in the city. There's an ease of driving an EV that, especially for new drivers, it's just so easy. There's no managing gears, there's none of that. So, you just get into the car, you put it into D and you drive off. The kind of performance that EVs give, you have that instant torque. So when you're in city or in stop-start traffic, you want to nip in and out of gaps, you've always got that power. There's no turbo lag. There's loads of advantages to EVs that I can think of. I think, there are barriers and there are hesitations in people's minds, and they're very real because I think it's new. It's a technology that people are still getting used to, and like Hormazd said, I think we have Tata to thank for bringing it closer to people, where people realize this is affordable, there is a choice for me now, and let's try it. And I think once they did, we've seen how quickly it's grown. In fact, just last week I was going to post on Instagram, and I realized that all my posts were EVs. So in 1 week, I had actually done 3 EVs where I was only doing IC engines before that. So it is changing, times are changing, and I think it's the momentum is gathering much faster than we expected it to. I think infrastructure, like we said, has a little bit of catching up to do, but that also is growing. And I think recently we did a drive in Gir forest where we had a portable charger, and that the charger was brought into the forest for us to be able to charge the EV. So solutions are changing. I think people are thinking differently, and there's lots that's happening in the EV sector. So I think we're definitely on the move. But I think we were talking earlier, and Harsha was saying that as a consumer, they have so many questions on their mind, and that there are certain anxieties still. Is that right, Harsha?
Yeah, so Harsha, just, you obviously represent a channel which is very, very general news to the masses. I think what we find is that sometimes there's not enough evangelization of electric mobility. Maybe it's not cool enough or whatever, but I think there is such a genuine interest in it. Do you think, even media needs to do more about just evangelizing electric mobility? Because let's face it, today the biggest threat to humanity is global warming, and that's CO2 related. We got to get the carbon out of what we do, and you all have done a lot in that respect. So but what's the sense? I mean, what can we do more to kind of really push this awareness and make everyone an eco warrior?
So I'll speak from that perspective. something which Dr. Roy always told me when I joined NDTV. He said, tell it like a story. So when we are going to talk about electric vehicles, we're going to talk about how we need to shift to alternate fuel. The challenge editorially for us is to make it digestible to our consumer, which is the audience, which is the viewer. So coming back to Pune, you know, why would we come down to Pune to cover something and make it nationally attractive? So firstly, when we came here, you know, to see the kind of energy, and then you have something like an EV electric vehicle rally. So that was great for us to cover because, you know, visually they had many elements. Also at NDTV, we are very committed to pushing beyond the headlines. So for example, we need to make it digestible to people that if there is suddenly floods in Barmer, in the desert, or there's a wildfire which happens in Sariska, which is very unusual, the temperatures go up. This is overall the kind of indicators of climate change and what we can do about it, the solutions are summits like this. So I think editorially for us, it's important that we create talking points, like you're saying, we go away, you know, unfortunately TV is a little bit about news and sensationalism, but on NDTV we're very committed to giving space to topics like this and making it easy to understand, easy to communicate, and that's the reason actually why we are here today. So I think from the editor's perspective, that's what we need to do, not be evangelical perhaps about it, but to start the buzz, get people talking.
Right. And Samrat, turning to you, obviously being Pune based, and you know, I'd said this earlier, Maharashtra and especially this belt is really the center of gravity of the automotive industry. Not just EVs, but you know, the entire auto industry. As I said, you know, Chakan has developed like into something. I've seen it grow over the years. We've got really the top brands over here. We've got the largest EV maker here. So by, you know, in that sense, this is the largest producer of EVs in the country, the state. You know, just looking at the infrastructure, you know, the kind of attraction of this area. And, you know, I'll just give you one example which I had. Recently, I drove on the Samruddhi Mahamarg, you know, Nagpur to Mumbai, which is just an amazing road. And what I'm told already that they're planning to have EV stations every 100 kilometers. So, you know, that EV charging points every 100 kilometers. So, you know, looking at the state, what's being done, what needs to be done, you know, really to make this the kind of EV capital of the country.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to congratulate this Maharashtra state and Pune Municipal Corporation, its policymakers as well as administrators, because perhaps it could have been the first municipal corporation of, say, 50 lakh population, which is running without diesel public transport vehicle since 1st of April. So this is a huge initiative. So there were 131 diesel vehicles by the end of last year, and today there are zero public transport on diesel. So this is massive transition that was, we often talk about, as a journalist, as an editor, we often talk about politics, but we less talk about policies. The way government has taken decisions in last 2-3 years, out of 131, now there are 390 electrical vehicles running in Pune city, electrical buses running in Pune city. They are transporting daily, say, few lakh people, and more 500 electric buses will join the fleet. So it is, at present it is about electric vehicle, but soon it will transform into hydrogen or any other alternative vehicle. I see this as a huge transition, because as a common citizen, I may not know the climate change and why people are changing from diesel to electric vehicle, but I know that electric vehicle or even CNG buses are more efficient. I am paying the same cost and getting nice transportation than the diesel noise and smoke pollution. So this transition is happening in Pune, from Mumbai to Pune belt for last 10 years. Now it has taken much speed. So if we see the policies of Maharashtra government for over the, even the Aditya ji was here last evening, perhaps this is the first state where clear-cut electrical mobility, alternative fuel mobility policies are in place. The government of Maharashtra has stopped buying government vehicles in running on diesel fuel. So these kind of policy decisions are impacting common citizens, and I see huge transition in coming days because of the historically building of automobile industry in this area.
Right, and I think, as you said, it's very clear that, in this transition when, until electrification reaches a tipping point where the affordability comes in, really, what's crucial is government support and policy support. And, as you said, it's heartening to see state like Maharashtra really pushing this agenda more and more. But Samrat, just turning to you, running the media which you do you still think that more awareness needs to be created for consumers, really, as to how critical it is, to move to a low carbon future? I mean, we are talking about serious global warming, which actually we may not feel the impact, but future generations will. So, just on really the absolute environmental kind of importance of this kind of transition.
Yeah, I definitely see that more awareness is needed. Awareness not in the form of just publicity or anything, but the policy level awareness. Because, see, as a common consumer, I am doubtful for few things. One is whether I could get electrical charging stations. So there is a push for the policy, but the adoption at the city level is less. So every apartment, even state and municipal corporation has adopted a policy that every new apartment more than 100 flat system may have electric charging station. But once we start to realize that thing, okay, this is at my home, at my apartment, I don't need to go to petrol station or CNG station to fill the fuel. Then only adoption will be there. Then only the rapid change will be there. This is the first thing, the availability of charging. Then there are doubts. You expert people like you can clear the doubts. But so we usually think kitna deti hai. So that is the kind of approach in India, in Pune and in everywhere. So I don't know how long it can run. So can I get electric charging station from Pune to Kolhapur, Pune to Nagpur, Pune to Aurangabad? These kind of doubts are there in the minds of people. I see a psychological change in the mindset of people. So there are more than 15,000 vehicles running in Pune city. Those are privately owned e-vehicles, or it's e-vehicle, not CNG vehicle, particularly e-vehicle. People are actually experimenting with the new brands. They are not going only for the established brand like Tata, TVS and other things. They are also experimenting in two-wheeler in very new brand. Those brands were unknown to us for less than 2 years back. So people are experimenting, they are ready. They need to have policy level sensitization that yes, you can get this at this place, definitely. Like I know where my petrol pump is, but I don't know where my charging station is. If we could come up with that kind of policy level sensitization among the people, then the way with which we are actually transforming from traditional fuel to alternative fuel, the transformation will take much speed.
I think Samrat is quite right, because when you talk to people or consumers, like he says, where you know exactly where the next petrol station is, a lot of awareness about charging stations, where they are, the facilities, portable charging stations, the fact that they can be set up in buildings, that needs to proliferate a lot more. I think the companies themselves need to make people more aware of how they function and what the availabilities are. A lot of them are very localized to certain areas. Like, you would see in Bangalore, where the IT parks are, they have a lot of them, but the infrastructure is very, very localized, and they remain localized. It needs to become a little bit more widespread. People need to, I think, get down to consumer level, which they haven't just yet. It's still very B2B, and consumers don't really know about the ability to be, it's actually quite easy to be able to charge your car and set up portable charging stations in buildings as well.
Yeah, I think the challenge really is that, a lot of people are still finding obstacles in doing that. But Renuka, I just wanted to ask you, you said charging so far hasn't been a problem in Mumbai, but have you taken a car out of town? I mean, are you still concerned that, will it work? Do you need to be tech savvy to a certain extent? It's not so easy as getting someone to your car, like at a petrol pump. He just puts it in, you don't even have to get out. Here you have to do everything yourself. Maybe one day we'll have attendance, I don't know if this is India. But is this something that might hinder you that, okay, I'm going to be city bound, or I'm still not going to stray too far from a plug that I'm aware of.
I think that is the biggest challenge. I think that's what's on most people's minds. And I'll be very frank, we've done drives where we've come literally Bombay, Pune, and then realized we're less than 50% when we've reached Pune. So how are we going to get back? And then been, in search of charging stations, some closed, some not functional. Actually been to, manufacturers, but it wasn't working. And we've had issues as well. So it's not as easy as going to a petrol pump. It's not as convenient and as safe. So that is still the issue where I say that infrastructure, I think, has to catch up a little bit. It has to proliferate a lot more for people to be absolutely comfortable going long distance. But I would say within a city where you can go home and charge your car, it's absolutely easy. So I think the long distance is where people hesitate to buy EVs when they're people who travel a lot. But I think for people who live in cities and in and around cities, they're realizing more and more so that it's actually a very convenient mode of transport.
Well, just speaking from a bit of experience also and taking off from what Renuka said, but it's improving, I would say, almost every day, every month, because we are constantly going on long drives. We test EVs for range. As Renuka said, we drove one from here all the way to Gir Forest. We've taken an Exxon EV to the Satpura Tiger Reserve. I mean, it's amazing driving these electric vehicles in these pristine surroundings where it's quiet, non-polluting. In fact, I think there should be a policy where every national park should have only EVs because it's typically fitting. But I think, we are in this transition right now of being the kind of early adopters, the evangelists. And the charging infrastructure we are seeing is coming. But, what's going to happen is by 2024-25, just knowing future manufacturers' plans, and I'm talking about passenger cars in particular, we're going to see an avalanche of EVs coming. I mean, it's going to be shooting like that. I think what's holding back growth really, though we grew 300%, but off a very small base from last year to this year, is just the choice which I had spoken about. But you've got Maruti coming in, you've got Hyundai coming in, Kia, Toyota, everyone is coming in with all guns blazing with 15 lakh EV, which is, generally on the affordable side. And now that's going to really push demand. So I think in the next 3 years, the infrastructure just has to be ready to cater to that kind of explosion in EVs. Right now, it's still, the numbers are still small. So I think that's one concern I would have, that, by 25, we should be absolutely ready with a really robust and widespread charging infrastructure. But, I want to take off on one interesting point also, which Samrat said, is that, there are new brands coming in and people are even trying new brands. And I think that's one of the fantastic bits about electrification and the opportunities it presents is it's the barriers to entry are much lower than they are with an IC car. Because typically with an IC car, the IC engine is the biggest barrier. It has to be fully localized, it has to be developed, and the investment cost for that is just humongous. But with EVs, much easier to kind of, let's say, enter. And we've seen that. We've seen so many startups, Ola's being a classic example, which has really disrupted the industry. Of course, they've had a lot of issues in their quest to go, very, very quickly. But as a concept, it's disrupted the distribution network. I mean, I just got an Ola bike. I just bought one because I wanted to have the whole experience. I had it delivered to me. That was fantastic. I didn't have to go to a dealer or anything. It came literally home delivered like you would, click to cart and get it from Amazon. It did take a long time. There are a lot of teething issues. But honestly, as a concept, it was phenomenal. And I think you can only do this again with EVs because there's no pre-delivery inspection, oil change, all that sort of thing. So I think EVs, just by the very concept, are hugely disruptive. They can democratize mobility in time. A lot of startups, have, let's say, the opportunity to get into this space. Because if you see the auto industry right now as it is, it's, it's controlled by a very, very small number of OEMs. I mean, 3 to 4 OEMs have 80% of the market or 90% of the market. That's what it's like. So, and leaving everyone to scrap for the rest. But with EVs, everyone can start with a clean slate. And I think that's what is really, exciting about this space. And again, there's one very interesting factor which again for passenger vehicles, the other big barrier that there was with IC engines, which is gone with EVs, is this sub 4 meter rule which we have, where there is an excise preference for cars below, a tax preference for cars below sub 4 meters, whereas with EVs it's a flat 5% GST. So again, this big barrier, because clearly globally no one makes cars below sub 4 meters. So that's again another kind of leveler which electrification brings. Because you talk to a lot of manufacturers and say this sub 4 meter legislation, you know, it really is a big barrier, because India just doesn't have the scale for a lot of global OEMs to develop a car just for the Indian market. But on the flip side, I think that's also one thing we need to consider, and I'd just like to turn to you, because, you know, with cars, we've got 3 bogies. One is safety, which again is being taken care of by big emission norms. I mean, big safety norms. Safety norms are getting stronger. Then there's pollution, which is again a big enemy, which is taken care of by electric mobility. But the third is congestion, which can only be taken care of by size. So again, you know, the thought is typically EVs tend to get bigger because you need bigger batteries in them. So people like to have them bigger. So again, you know, the issue of congestion, it's not pollution. It's nothing to do with global warming. I mean, you can be stuck in your car in an EV, not polluting anything, but you're stuck for a long time. So that raises the question of more, let's say, public transport, mass mobility in that sense, electric buses, obviously metros are coming up. So, you know, Harsha, I just wanted your thoughts on this, and, you know, even Samrat
But before that, I just want to ask a question. See, in the TV space, we have something called Voices of the People. It's called Vox Pop. So I just want to ask a Vox Pop from the editor's perspective. You've given the whole policy. You've given how it's going to, you know, of course, we know how it fits into climate change, etc. But from the people's point of view, we were just discussing that earlier. How do the costs work? Because, you know, if you buy an electric vehicle, you said 15 to 16 lakhs, okay? It's much more than what you would buy for a petrol vehicle. But of course, you have to look at the petrol cost. Now, similarly, when Rajasthan went solar, for example, the amount you would invest in solar panels, it brought down your electricity bills, but that was the investment. So to all 3 of you, I just want to ask, how do you think the cost at the end of the day works out for the average Indian consumer? Because you're the experts in this.
Well, I think it's a combination of several things. One is eventually the material costs will come down, though it's right now gone the opposite way, just because we are living in a shortage economy. So raw materials, everything is shortage of containers, microchips, you just can't get enough of it. We are literally in the midst of a shortage economy. Hopefully that will be temporary, supply-demand issue. So clearly when, you know, let's say raw material costs for batteries are supposed to come down, they're actually going up right now, but we assume this will be temporary as people scale up. So I think that's from the product side. Then I think again, government policies, you know, where again, you know, there are great incentives. I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, thanks to the state of Maharashtra, I got 60,000 bucks off on my Ola scooter, which I got, you know, because of the FAME policy and whatever. So, you know, these are things which will stimulate it. And I think, you know, clearly we have to reach a tipping point. And then finally, when you do the math, and, you know, this is what Tata Motors gave me, and why the Nexon EV is now outselling the Nexon diesel, is because when you add up everything, the benefits you get of, let's say, lower GST, the running cost, the maintenance cost, I think evolved customers will finally realize that there is even a cost benefit. And we are coming to that point. It's taking some time, but I think we are getting there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there will be a parity between IC engines and EVs eventually. And then finally, you know, I think that tipping point will be reached. And, you know, in the end, IC engines is something we'll see in museums or maybe in the hands of car collectors.
You know, for years, diesel cars were more expensive than petrol cars. People would still go out and make that initial investment because they felt that that daily dip was much less in their wallet. They had better fuel efficiency, and then I'm spending less. And I think that philosophy and mentality will continue into EVs, where yes, I'm spending that one time, I'm spending a little bit more, but my daily dip into my wallet is going to be much, much less. And I think that has always been the case with the Indian consumer, and that will probably continue.
I come from, my birthplace is Kolhapur, and where I was surrounded by furnaces and foundries. So it was just 20 years back. Now, most of these furnaces and foundries are converted into 3D printers. So they are supplying, this is an auxiliary industry. They are supplying to the Tatas and Mahindra and Ashok Leyland spare parts. But now the spare part manufacturing is shifting towards 3D. The cost of furnace against the cost of carbon has declined drastically. So this will eventually happen. It will take few years, but the speed with which we start today will define when we can actually reach to the tip. This is how I feel now.
And I'll tell you one thing, I mean, honestly, I was quite skeptical with the pace of electrification. I always thought it would be slower because, quite frankly, India is a very cost-sensitive market, and, you know, at the end of the day, everyone, you know, really is concerned, as I said, more about, you know, saving their wallet than the environment. But, you know, I've really been staggered and taken aback by this adoption. And I think, again, it's a function of many things. One is, you know, again, I think it's driven largely by the running costs. And I think it's our mentality as well, you know, as a culture. We have this very puritanical sense of value in the way we use things. I mean, you will have someone buying an S-Class or Maybach worth, you know, a couple of crores, but if he's getting only 4 and 5 kilometers per liter, he'll still grumble about it, you know, because they just don't, you know, that mindset isn't there. So on the flip side, someone might want to pay a little more, but, you know, just the kind of, let's say, the thrill of not having to spend on fuel at all, I think that is really driving a lot of change. And I think the economics are working out. But, you know, I just wanted to also just touch upon this whole thing, and, you know, Samrat, even you, on mass mobility, because one thing is that, you know, congestion is something which is not being addressed. In a way, it's not really, you know, related to pollution directly, but again, it has several impacts. So this whole thing on, let's say, clean, you know, let's say public transport, I think that also is something which, you know, states are also pushing in a big way, but should we be doing more on that?
Yeah, we definitely should do more, especially for the area like Mumbai, Thane, Pune, where we have education hub, IT. See, I have seen I determined Pune in 3 transition stages. First is, it was education transition. It started to happen 150 years back. Then it was industrial transition with Tatas and Mahindras and Bajaj. They started manufacturing in Pune in late 1950s. And third was the IT transition that started just 30 years, 25 years back. Now it is, I will not call e-vehicle transition, but it's an automotive transition. It will happen and it will start generating momentum with the public transportation, because in Pune city, more than 1 million people use PMPL buses daily. See, out of that, if I could, Maharashtra government has put some agenda of setting up X number of vehicles by 2030. But if we could transform these diesel and petrol run vehicles as early as possible, say in 3 years, 5 years down the line, then it will impact more on the consumer side. Then people will think that, okay, if government buses are running on alternative fuel and electric vehicle, then I should, instead of using my petrol vehicle, I should shift to the electric vehicle. That transition will definitely need more push from the government side as well as from the local municipal bodies.
There's also another infrastructural issue when you drive an EV, you figure out, and which can be a speed breaker for EVs, and that literally is actually speed breakers. Because EVs typically have a very low ground clearance, because by design the battery packs sit low down, so the ground clearance automatically reduces in an EV. And I'll give you one experience. I drove or tested a Tesla Model 3 in Bangalore, and quite frankly, it was undrivable because it was hitting every speed breaker possible. So clearly this has to be an issue. I mean, car makers can't keep jacking up the ride heights. It's physically not possible. And from what I understand, there is actually a norm or a standard for speed breakers, but, you know, maybe it needs to be followed a bit more. And, you know, it's just better for everyone in terms of safety, you know, where they're properly marked. Some of them are like Mount Everest size, some are, you know, flat. So I think this is one practical aspect. After driving EVs, we've realized that they suffer from low ground clearance vis-a-vis a normal IC cup, because the battery packs are meant to be low down over there for the best center of gravity. But, you know, the other thing is, you know, when you hit them, there's not too much of an issue. So again, that's been one experience. Of course, I think the charging is...
Well, I recently drove the Mini, and the first thing they told us is that we've raised the ride height because they just had to, otherwise it wouldn't have cleared the speed breakers in Bombay. So most of the manufacturers are having to make adjustments, but of course it affects the way the car runs and handles and everything, and I think in the long run it's not great. So if there was a norm, that would definitely be much better. But to address the question, I think that Harsha also asked earlier about people adopting EVs, you know, once they get into an EV and they drive it and they realize it's so silent, there's no noise, there's no, you know, it's just so refined. I mean, you spend lakhs and lakhs on a car to get that value of refinement that you get almost instantly at this level. And that's another big driver for people who get into an EV for the first time. They just find it so refined. And that's another thing that's changing people and bringing them towards EVs as well.
Well, I think we've running out of time for this session, but I'd just like to end with one question to all of y'all. When do you think you'll get your first EV, and what will be the trigger point to do that? Harsha, starting with you.
A vox pop, so I'll give a vox pop, the rising fuel prices.
Okay, yeah, that's very well.
Fuel prices only.
Renuka?
I've been driving EVs for a very long time now, and I think the tipping point for me was realizing that it's actually very practical. You don't need to charge it as often as you think that you do, especially in city limits.
Yeah, and I think for me, well, yes, fuel prices, but I think number one is climate change. You know, we've seen it, it's real. We never used to have cyclones on the western seaboard. Now we have one almost every season. Always used to be in the Bay of Bengal. It's frightening, it's coming home, it's closer than we think. And really, I think we've got to get that carbon out of, you know, our lives, reduce our carbon footprint as much as possible. And I really think conclaves like this really stimulate, encourage, and motivate everyone to move in that direction. Thank you very much.
Before we end, Hormazd, we have a question for you. With all of this EV, and do you think it presents another opportunity for, you know, like India became the hub for low-cost manufacturing. Do you think that it presents an opportunity for India, and especially like Chakan, as you see, we have all the auto ancillary manufacturers, everything there's a ready base. Do you think that there's an opportunity for Chakan to grow and become a hub for EVs as well?
Yeah, I think it is, because if you see globally where we are in the EV evolution, definitely you've got more evolved markets like Europe and China. I mean, US is also there. But, you know, rest of the world, I think we are way ahead of them. And for that, those markets, I think India presents itself as a great EV base. I mean, for me, the big telling point is Ford. After, you know, let's say within few months of exiting operations in India, they're saying we're looking at coming back to make EVs for export. So that says a lot. It says what the opportunities are. But as I said, you know, yeah, here's to a low carbon future. Thanks very much, everyone.